Maribel's old sedan crunched on the gravel driveway, the sound mixing with the buzzing of late summer insects in the humid Ohio air. She was bone-tired from a double shift at the diner, her feet aching in their worn-out shoes. But the exhaustion evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp shock. Her front yard was a war zone. A dark, wooden chest, her grandmother's, was split open on the grass. A box of vinyl records, the ones her late husband, Jareth, had loved, was piled by the curb. Clothes, photo albums, and a small, porcelain ballerina she'd had since childhood were scattered like trash. What is this?" Maribel whispered, her hand frozen on the car door. Her heart hammered against her ribs. These weren't just things. This was her entire life, her history, tossed out to wilt in the heavy, sticky heat. The front door of her own house creaked open. Her daughter-in-law, Trina, stepped out onto the porch. She was wearing new, expensive-looking yoga pants and wiping her hands on a dish towel. Her smile was bright, false, and didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, you're home early," Trina said, her voice light. Behind her, Maribel's son, Lowell, hovered in the doorway, his shoulders slumped. He wouldn't look at his mother. "We decided to do some cleaning," Trina continued, gesturing to the yard with a dismissive wave. "You know, get rid of all this clutter." Trina stepped onto the lawn, nudging the broken ballerina with the toe of her designer sneaker. "Honestly, Maribel, those old things are useless. It's time to modernize this place." Maribel's gaze moved from the shattered porcelain to Trina's smug face. She saw Lowell flinch in the doorway. The smell of cut grass and the deep, aching betrayal settled in her chest. She had given them a place to stay when Lowell lost his job. She had fed them from her own small paychecks. She took one slow, deliberate breath. The air was thick, but her mind was suddenly crystal clear. She looked Trina straight in the eyes, her voice quiet but harder than steel. "Then I'll clean out what's useless to me, too." Trina's smile wavered. "What's that supposed to mean?" Lowell finally spoke, his voice thin. "Mom, we just thought." Maribel ignored them. She walked past the wreckage of her memories, straight up the porch steps. She pushed past Lowell and Trina, who sputtered in protest. She walked directly to the small wooden desk by the window, grabbed the landline phone, and dialed 3 numbers. Trina scoffed, following her in. "Who are you calling? The junk collectors?" "They already left." Maribel put the receiver to her ear, her eyes locked on her son and his wife. "Hello? I need to report 2 trespassers I'd like removed from my property." The flashing blue and red lights painted the front of the house 15 minutes later. A patrol car pulled into the driveway, and a tall officer, his name tag reading Santiago, stepped out. He looked at the yard, then at Maribel on the porch, and finally at Trina, who was vibrating with anger. "Ma'am? You reported trespassers?" Officer Santiago asked Maribel, his voice calm. "I did," Maribel said, her voice steady. "These 2. They threw my belongings out of my home." Trina burst forward. "That's ridiculous. This is my mother-in-law. We live here. Tell him, Lowell." Lowell looked like a trapped animal. "Officer, she's my mom. This is just a family misunderstanding." Officer Santiago sighed, the practiced sigh of a man who'd seen this all before. "Ma'am," he said to Maribel, "if they live here, if they get mail here, I can't remove them. It's a civil matter, not a criminal one. You'd have to evict them." "I see," Maribel said, her face a cold mask. The betrayal settled deeper. The law wouldn't help her. Not yet. Trina's smug smile returned. "See, Maribel? You can't just throw us out. We have rights." "You have no rights to my property," Maribel said, turning her icy gaze on her. "You have no right to my late husband's records. Or my grandmother's chest." The officer looked at the scattered items. This is a real shame, what they've done. He turned to Trina. You two need to clean this up. Now. Put every single item back in the house. But it's junk. Trina protested. Now, Officer Santiago commanded, his voice hardening. Or I'll find a reason to cite you for dumping. Understand? Trina's face went pale. She and Lowell began scrambling in the dark, picking up the broken pieces of Maribel's life. Maribel didn't move. She just watched them. Finally, the officer tipped his hat to Maribel. You'll have to go to the courthouse for an eviction, ma'am. I'm sorry. Thank you, officer, Maribel said. But I don't think an eviction will be necessary. He looked at her, confused by her sudden confidence. Maribel just stared at Trina and Lowell. You can have the porch tonight. I'm locking the door. Why is Maribel suddenly so confident? It had all started 6 months ago with a phone call. Lowell's voice was thick with shame. Mom, I lost the job at the plant. They're doing cutbacks. Maribel hadn't hesitated. You come home, son. You and Trina. You come here. You can stay in your old room until you get back on your feet. Home was the small 2-story house Jareth had left her, paid in full. It was her sanctuary, her safe place. But her son needed her. Trina arrived like a storm. She complained the town was too small. She complained the house was vintage, a word she used like an insult. She made comments about Maribel's old-fashioned clothes from the diner. Maribel worked double shifts to keep the pantry full, while Trina shopped online with what little money Lowell had left. We need to keep up appearances, Lowell, Maribel overheard her saying. You can't get a good job if we look poor. Maribel had tried to connect with her. One afternoon, she brought out the porcelain ballerina. Jareth gave this to me on our first anniversary, she'd said, her voice soft with memory. He said it was as delicate and strong as I was. Trina had glanced up from her phone. That's nice. She hadn't even looked at it. The tension grew. Trina started talking about renovations. She wanted to paint the dark wood Jareth had so lovingly stained. She wanted to open up the space, which meant getting rid of Maribel's furniture. It's just clutter, Maribel, Trina said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. A new start. For all of us. Maribel had put her foot down. This is my home, Trina. These are my memories. Trina had smiled, but her eyes were cold. We'll see about that. Now, sitting in her locked bedroom, Maribel heard Trina and Lowell arguing on the porch below. The betrayal wasn't just about the yard. It was about the ballerina. Trina hadn't just thrown it out. She had smashed it. She had done it on purpose. At 5 a.m., Maribel slipped out of the house, leaving Trina and Lowell asleep in deck chairs on the porch. She drove her old sedan not to the bank, but to the diner. The Copper Spoon. The lights were already on. Calla, a woman with sharp eyes and hair pulled back in a tight bun, was starting the coffee. She wasn't just the manager. She was Maribel's oldest friend. You look like you've seen a ghost, Calla said, sliding a mug across the counter. Worse, Maribel said, I've seen the devil, and she's sleeping on my porch. She told Calla everything. The yard. The broken ballerina. The police. Calla listened, her face growing harder with every word. I told you, Maribel. I told you Trina was no good. I know, Maribel whispered, but he's my son. What was I supposed to do? Not this. Calla refilled her mug. I ran that check you asked for last week. You're not going to like it. Maribel had felt something was wrong for weeks. Trina's endless packages, Lowell's evasive answers. She'd asked Calla, who was also a notary and knew her way around public records, to quietly look into their finances. How bad? Maribel asked. Calla slid a folder across the counter. They didn't just lose Lowell's job, Maribel. He was fired for cause embezzlement. Maribel felt the air leave her lungs. No. Yes. A few $100s here and there. But Trina, she's the real piece of work. They're not just broke, Maribel. They're in debt up to their eyeballs. Credit cards, payday loans, and one very large, recent purchase. Calla turned the folder around. It was a bill of sale. Trina bought a brand new, $60,000 SUV 2 weeks ago, Calla said. She registered it to an address in the next county. But, how? Maribel was shaking. They don't have that kind of money. Calla's eyes were full of pity. She paid for it, Maribel. With a cashier's check. From an account that was opened last month. An account, in your name. Maribel's hands didn't shake. Her voice didn't waver. The shock had burned away, leaving something cold and hard in its place. The grief over her son's choices would come later. Right now, there was only the task. Calla, Maribel said, her voice low. Call your brother at the bank. Tell him to meet me at my house in 1 hour. And call Officer Santiago. Tell him I have new evidence. And that I am now pressing charges for identity theft. Maribel. Calla looked stunned by the sudden command. And one more thing, Maribel said, pushing the folder back. She stood up and took off her waitress apron, folding it neatly. Get the for sale signs out of storage. The ones for the building. Calla's jaw dropped. You're not. Oh, I am. The Copper Spoon Diner wasn't just where Maribel worked. It was the first property she and Jareth had bought 30 years ago. Then they bought the building it was in. Then the apartment building down the street. Maribel wasn't a poor waitress. She was one of the wealthiest, quietest landowners in the county. She had worked at the diner to stay busy after Jareth passed, to feel close to people, to keep an eye on her first investment. She'd let Trina and Lowell believe she was struggling, and they had used it against her. Maribel walked out of the diner, not as a victim, but as a CEO. When she pulled into her driveway, Trina and Lowell were sitting on the porch steps, looking miserable. You can't just lock us out. Trina shrieked, standing up. We're going to call a lawyer. Please do, Maribel said, walking past them. I have mine on the way. Along with the bank manager. And the police. She unlocked her front door and turned. Lowell was white as a sheet. Trina's face was a mask of confusion. You wanted to clean, Trina, Maribel said, her voice echoing in the morning air. We're about to find out just how much this cleaning is going to cost you. The next 20 minutes were a blur. Officer Santiago's cruiser arrived first. He was followed by a sharp-looking man in a suit, Mr. Davies, the bank manager. What is this? Trina demanded, her voice losing its edge. Lowell, tell them to go. Lowell just stared at his mother. Mom, what did you do? What you did, son, Maribel said softly. Mr. Davies stepped forward, holding a file. Mrs. Trina Harris? I'm the manager of the downtown bank. We need to discuss an account opened in Maribel's name. The one you are listed on as having power of attorney. Trina laughed, a high, nervous sound. I don't know what you're talking about. This, Mr. Davies said, producing a document. A forged power of attorney. You used it to open an account, link it to Mrs. Harris's primary savings, and transfer $75,000. Lowell let out a choked sound. 75. Trina, what did you do? I was fixing our lives. Trina screamed, her eyes wild. She was just hoarding it. All that money, and she's working as a waitress. It's sick. I was just borrowing it for the business. What business? Maribel asked, her voice deadly calm. The SUV, Officer Santiago said, stepping forward. We just ran the plates on a new vehicle registered to you. It's parked in a storage unit. That's grand theft auto, ma'am. And identity theft. And forgery. Trina looked at Lowell, her eyes pleading. Lowell, baby, I did it for us. We were going to pay it back. Lowell looked from the broken ballerina on the grass to his wife. He saw the new SUV in his mind, the one she told him was a lease. He saw the $75,000. He saw his mother's face, not angry, but empty. You didn't just clean, Trina, Lowell whispered, the realization dawning. You were in her desk. You weren't cleaning, you were stealing. It was useless. Trina shrieked. Old papers, old things. Just like she is. Ma'am, Officer Santiago said, pulling out his handcuffs. You need to put your hands behind your back. Trina didn't go quietly. She screamed. She cursed. She called Maribel names that made the banker flinch. She accused Lowell of being a worthless, spineless mama's boy who had let this happen. You set me up, she spat at Maribel, as Officer Santiago guided her into the back of the cruiser. You're a monster. You're a fake old woman. The only fake one here is you, Maribel said, not raising her voice. The car door slammed shut, cutting off the insults. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the crunch of gravel as the police car pulled away. Mr. Davies nodded to Maribel. We'll freeze everything. The car will be repossessed, and we'll start clawing back the funds. But the forgery, that's a serious criminal matter. Thank you, Maribel said. He nodded and left. Now, it was just Maribel and Lowell, alone in the wreckage of the yard. Her grandmother's broken chest lay between them like a coffin. Lowell was shaking, tears streaming down his face. Mom. I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know. I thought she was just buying clothes. I thought the SUV was a lease. I didn't know about the money. I didn't know about any of it. You didn't want to know, Maribel said, her voice tired. You let her complain about my house. You let her disrespect me. You watched her throw my life into the yard, and you hovered in the doorway. I was scared, Mom. She's so controlling? Maribel finished. Yes. I see that now. But Lowell, that doesn't excuse it. You stood by and did nothing. You let her break my home. I know, he whispered, finally looking up. His eyes were red and raw. What do I do now? Mom, I have nothing. I have no wife. No job. No, anything. I'm useless. He had used the exact word. The word Trina had used for Maribel's memories. Maribel looked at her son, this 30-year-old man who looked like a broken child. Her heart ached. She wanted to hug him. She wanted to shake him. Instead, she pointed to the broken porcelain ballerina on the ground. You can start, she said, by picking up the pieces. Lowell stared at the shattered porcelain. Mom, it's broken. It's garbage. Nothing is garbage until you decide to stop fighting for it, Maribel said. The glue is in the kitchen drawer. You'll need tweezers. It's going to take a long time. For the next 2 weeks, that's what Lowell did. He lived in his old room, the one Trina had tried to turn into a media lounge. By day, he went to a temp agency and took a job in manual labor, stacking boxes in a warehouse. By night, he sat at the kitchen table under the harsh light, painstakingly gluing the ballerina back together. It was a slow, frustrating process. The pieces were tiny. His big, clumsy hands fumbled. Maribel would sit across from him, drinking tea, reading a book. They didn't talk much at first. The silence was thick with shame and unspoken apologies. One night, Lowell's hand shook and a tiny chip of porcelain flew across the room. He slammed his fist on the table. "I can't. It's impossible. It's always going to be broken, Mom. Can't you see that?" "Of course I see it," Maribel said quietly, not looking up from her book. "It will never be perfect again. It's always going to have cracks. That's the point." He looked at her, confused. "You don't fix something like this because you want it to be new," she explained. "You fix it because you're sorry it broke. You fix it to show you value it. The cracks are just a reminder of what happened. And a reminder that you were willing to do the work." Lowell looked at the half-finished ballerina. He took a deep breath, got on his hands and knees, and started searching for the missing piece. A week later, Trina called him from jail, begging him to use his paycheck to bail her out. "I can't," Lowell told her, his voice shaking but firm. "I need this money. I'm paying my mom back." "Pay her back? For what? That old witch?" Trina shrieked. "For the food," Lowell said, looking at Maribel across the kitchen. "For the roof over my head. And for the glue." He hung up the phone. Trina's day in court came. It was a fast, brutal affair. The evidence was overwhelming. The forgery. The bank records. The testimony from Mr. Davies. Even her own parents, when contacted, refused to help, admitting this was a pattern of behavior. Trina, facing multiple felony charges and a long prison sentence, took a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to grand theft and identity theft. In exchange for a lighter sentence, she agreed to full restitution, though Maribel knew she would never see a dime. The judge sentenced her to 3 years, with parole possible in 18 months. As she was let out, her eyes met Maribel's. There was no remorse. Only a cold, bitter hatred. Lowell was in the back of the courtroom. He watched the woman he had married, the woman who had destroyed his life, get taken away. He didn't feel relief. He didn't feel sadness. He just felt empty. When he got back to the house, Maribel was in the yard. She was sanding down her grandmother's wooden chest. The wood was scarred where Trina had broken the lock, but the chest itself was solid oak. "It's good wood," Maribel said as Lowell sat on the grass. "Strong." "She's gone," Lowell said. "Yes," Maribel said. She got 3 years." Maribel nodded, not stopping her work. "That's the price." "I feel awful," he admitted. "I loved her. Or I thought I did. And now I ruined everything. For you. For me." "You didn't," Maribel said, finally stopping. She wiped her forehead, leaving a smudge of sawdust. "You made a terrible mistake. You let a fox into the henhouse because you were lonely. But you didn't steal. You didn't lie. You were just weak." "That's not better," he said, his voice thick. "No," Maribel agreed. "But it's fixable." She pointed to the house. "I'm selling the copper spoon. And the apartments. I'm tired of working as a waitress. I'm old. I want to travel. I want to see the Grand Canyon." Lowell looked shocked. "You're selling everything?" "Not everything," Maribel said, patting the oak chest. "I'm keeping this house." But it's too big for me. And all this stuff. She looked at the restored, cracked ballerina Lowell had placed on the porch rail. I'm going to need someone to manage the properties. Someone to fix the pipes, and mow the lawns, and collect the rent. Someone I can teach. Someone who's good with their hands. Lowell looked at his own calloused, glue-stained hands. Mom. I don't know how to do any of that. I know, Maribel smiled, the first real smile in months. But I do. And I can teach you. If you're willing to learn. 1 year later. Maribel's front yard was no longer a war zone. It was a garden. Tomatoes, peppers, and roses grew where her life had once been scattered. The old, scarred wooden chest sat on the porch, beautifully restored and stained, holding gardening tools. Lowell was on a ladder, fixing a loose shutter. He was leaner, tanner, and his eyes were clear. He had moved out of his mother's house and into the small carriage house apartment behind it. He was now the official property manager for Harris Holdings. Maribel came out with 2 glasses of iced tea. Don't you fall, Lowell, she said. I won't, Mom, he said, climbing down. He took the tea, his hands rough and capable. The tenants in 2B are complaining about the sink again. Then you'd better go fix it, Maribel said, sipping her tea. Yes, ma'am. He smiled. Hey, I finished it. He led her into the house. In the living room, on the mantelpiece, sat the porcelain ballerina. Lowell had not only glued it, but he had also learned to paint. He had carefully filled the cracks with gold lacquer, an art he'd found online called kintsugi. The cracks were not hidden. They were the most beautiful part of the piece, shining in the afternoon light. It's beautiful, Lowell, Maribel whispered, her hand going to her heart. It's not perfect, he said. It's still broken. But it's whole. And the cracks they're part of its story now. Our story. Maribel looked at her son. He was right. The weakness was gone, replaced by a quiet strength. The betrayal was still there, a scar, but it was healing. Yes, Maribel said, touching the golden seam. It is. She looked at her son, looked at her home, and finally understood. Trina was right about one thing. Those old things were useless. The anger, the shame, the fear. She had cleaned them all out. All that was left was what mattered. What was strong. What was real. And what was being, piece by piece, lovingly put back together. What did you think of Maribel's story? Leave a comment and subscribe for more stories of powerful redemption.